I feel like everybody remembers the first game they've played on a particular console, right? It doesn't matter how old you are, what the console is, you can always kind of recall that particular moment in time without hesitation. For example, my first time ever playing a video game was the Sega Mega Drive version of The Terminator, and this part scared me so much that I ran out of the room. It also happened to be the opening 5 seconds of the game, by the way. Although a few moments after that I tried Sonic the Hedgehog, and well, the rest is history, really. The PlayStation, on the other hand, was a much more pleasant experience. When I originally got my console as a birthday present, it came with a copy of Demo 1 Volume 3 and one game, and that game was Space Jam. Now, Space Jam, for all intents and purposes, is not very good. But regardless, since it was my first PlayStation game, I kind of have a soft spot for it all the same. It probably helped that Space Jam was also my favorite movie growing up as well, but yeah, I digress. Now, the reason I bring up Space Jam is because this was also my first Looney Tunes game, and after this point, for whatever reason, I just tended to gravitate towards Looney Tune games as a sort of comfort series. And the good news is that almost every other Looney Tunes game in existence just so happens to be better than Space Jam. On the Game Boy, I became addicted to the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle series. I got handed down a SNES from a family member with a copy of Tiny Toons Buster Bust Loose, which is a 16-bit Konami platformer, so you know it's good. And over on the PlayStation, well, there was no shortage of good options, from kart racers to Bugs Bunny orientated 3D platformers, and even one that featured Taz and was entirely playable in co-op, which not only worked really well, but is still kind of an amazing feature for a 3D platformer, I gotta say. But today, we're gonna talk about my favorite Looney Tunes game, one that has kind of faded into obscurity over the years, which is a crying shame because I can confidently say that this isn't just the best Looney Tunes game ever made, it's also one of the best and most unique experiences that you can get on the PlayStation. And it's a game all about stealing sheep. Well, this is Sheepdog and Wolf, which first made its way to the PlayStation and Windows in September of the year 2001 over in PAL regions, and 1 week later it launched in North America, but under the different title of Looney Tunes Sheep Raider, which I imagine was done to make titling this video just that little bit more difficult for me. Now, I tend not to pick favorites when it comes to differing regional titles, but I will say, outside of the title screen, the North American version still refers to everything as Sheepdog and Wolf, so make of that what you will. This game comes to us courtesy of French company Infogrames, who also publish many of the other Looney Tunes games on the platform. Although, unlike the previous Bugs Bunny platformers, which were developed by Behavior Interactive, aka Ass to Mouth, aka the developers of Dead by Daylight, of all things, this game was actually developed by one of Infogrames' internal development teams, Infogrames Lyon, who had experience working on various Game Boy Color Looney Tunes games, as well as Lucky Luke on the PS1, which you may know I have a love-hate relationship with. Now, Sheepdog and Wolf is an interesting game for a couple of reasons. One is that while it is a 3D platformer, I mean, you do jump around and do platformer stuff, at its core it really is more of a puzzle game, a puzzle platformer, if you will, that also has a few stealth elements thrown in for good measure. Now, generally the safe bet with mascot platformers is to just go with the usual collectathon stuff we all know and love, but here we have something very, very different and actually quite unique for a game of its era. But not only that, Infogrames Lyon also opted to base the game around one of the deeper cuts from the Looney Tunes library, so much so that for years I thought this game starred a character that isn't even present in the game. So, to the untrained eye, who is this character? This is Wile E. Coyote, right? Well, you're wrong. This is actually Ralph Wolf. Now, I don't blame you if you didn't know this. For one, Wile E. Coyote and Ralph Wolf share virtually the exact same character design, with the only major differing features being the colors of their eyes and nose. But on top of that, all throughout my childhood, I had only ever been exposed to Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons, which, I mean, are classics after all. I'm certainly not surprised, but yeah, up until I played this game, I had never even heard of Ralph Wolf and his version of the Roadrunner, Sam Sheepdog. Heck, even in Space Jam, a movie that highlighted pretty much the entire Looney Tunes universe, the only acknowledgement of these characters was a brief background cameo from Sam Sheepdog, and that was it. Of course, nowadays, it's very easy to go back and check out some classic Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog animated shorts which date as far back as the early 50s, and surprise surprise, they're absolutely hilarious. They share a lot of the same dynamic that Wily and Roadrunner have, with Ralph coming up with plans to steal sheep, many of which involving gadgets from our old friends at the Acme Corporation, while Sam the Sheepdog foils said plans and bonks Ralph Wolf a few times on the head for good measure. Classic slapstick animation at its very best. Although, unlike Wile E. Coyote, who is more or less obsessed with catching the Roadrunner, Ralph and Sam actually only do this as their day job. They begin each day by clocking into work and are actually friends outside of this, talking about the usual mundane things like the weather and what they got up to on the weekend. I don't know why this element in particular is so funny to me, but I love that the second the workday is up, they could literally care less about the sheep. At the end of the day, it's just business. It's nothing personal, you know?
It's too close to quitting time, Ralph. Let's pick it up there in the morning. Okay, Sam. Good night. Good night, Ralph. Pleasant dreams.
So now that we know a little bit about our stars, it may not come as a surprise that the aim of today's game is to steal sheep. Plus, I already said that earlier in the video, and to really hammer it home, here's Daffy Duck saying it as well.
The aim of our game is simple: to steal sheep.
So this game does actually have some semblance of a plot. After another hard day at work for Ralph and Sam, a suit-clad Daffy Duck appears in a limo unannounced at Ralph's home and whisks him away to take part in a game show titled Sheep, Dog and Wolf. A game show that involves Ralph going from level to level, tasked with stealing a single sheep from Sam's flock and returning it to a set goal, all without harming said sheep. What does Ralph get for his trouble? Well, it's never really explained, but hey, we're already in the studio, so can't quit now. So, the core of the game is quite simple. It's up to us, Ralph Wolf, to return a single sheep to a set point in a level. Of course, doing this is easier said than done. We're gonna have to overcome chasms, rivers, explosives, bulls, dragons, lava, and of course, our old friend Sam Sheepdog. One of the most relentless and efficient killing machines ever put in a video game. Just kidding, he only bonks you on the head a few times, but trust me, this dog ain't messing around. The game itself flows in a nice linear fashion, using this game show set as the game's main hub. Once you beat a level, you then gain access to a new level within the set, and so on and so forth. Nothing too out of the ordinary here. Of course, at the beginning of the game, we do get taken through a nice tutorial level where our host Daffy Duck explains all the basics. Of course, not without throwing in a bit of the old Looney Tunes humor for good measure. The game controls pretty much like any old 3D platformer on the console. Thankfully, since it's a later release, our movement is analog based, so it's pretty smooth and responsive. You can control the camera using the L2 and R2 buttons, switch to a first person view by pressing triangle, and on top of that, we got ourselves a double jump and the ability to run really fast by tapping the circle button. The game even gives us a nice Roadrunner segment to get us up to speed with this particular feature. Oh, I see what you're doing there, game. I ain't falling for that one. And yeah, that's about it for the main controls. Nothing really too fancy, right? Well, you gotta remember that even though you gotta do a little bit of platforming from time to time, this game is really all about using Ralph to interact with his environment to help achieve your goal of stealing some sheep. This could mean jumping on some objects to move items to trigger switches, or even ordering some items from the Acme Corporation so you can cross seemingly impossible gaps. And I gotta give it to the game, they really nailed the experience of flying around using a big red rocket strapped to your back. You see, each level in this game is essentially a brand new puzzle within itself. You get dropped into a sandbox, and from there, you just gotta figure out how to get the sheep from point A to point B. Sometimes there's only one solution, sometimes there's multiple solutions, but the game always gives you all the tools that you need to accomplish this task, and it's up to you to figure out how to use these to complete the job at hand. let's look at the game's first level, which is a nice introduction to the systems at play. Now first things first, you can bring up a map that shows an overview of the level and its various sections by pressing select at any time. You can see various things like item placement, the goal location, and your position on the level, and you can even get some basic info on what the various items do as well, which will definitely come in handy because there is a lot of them. All your items are accessible from the various mailboxes that you'll find across the map. Interact with a mailbox and the Acme Corporation will airdrop in an item for use. Each item is chosen specifically for the level at hand, so generally speaking, if there is an item available for you to use, you're probably going to need it at some point. And also, if you ever waste an item by accident, you can always return to the mailbox and get a new one, so you don't really have to worry about soft locking yourself midway through a level. The first item we get in this level is some dynamite, which to nobody's surprise is used to blow up some boulders blocking our entrance to the goal area. Pretty self-explanatory. Now of course, the task is to get a single sheep over to said goal, and here they are. By the way, I just want to highlight how amazing these sheep models are. Look at them there, just sleeping away. I wonder if they count themselves to go to sleep. Who knows? Anyway, next up we have to deal with Sam the sheepdog himself, and this is where the stealth aspect of the game comes into play. You see, once you enter into Sam's protection area, his head will appear in the top right corner of the screen. If there's a green background, you're safe. If there's a yellow background, you're either in his field of vision or noise range. And if it's red, well, you better run like hell, because otherwise you're going to get bonked pretty quickly. Now, it's important to understand how Sam's vision works. Basically, the direction of Sam's head in the top right is proportional to your own position. So, for example, if the head is looking to the left, he's looking to your left. If it's to the right, it's your right. And if it's dead center, he is looking straight at you. You'll need to keep track of this when moving throughout the game, whether you're dashing from object to object or just trying to get a sheep out of there without being spotted. Of course, since this is the first level, we can actually just waltz up behind him without any real risk. The only thing we gotta be careful of is making any noise, and thankfully, by holding down the R1 button, we can tiptoe around, which alleviates the issue. Now of course, getting a sheep is only half the battle. We've still got to get it to the goal too. Now this may seem like a straightforward task, but in this case, the path back to the goal requires us to cross a bridge. A bridge that can only hold the weight of one creature at a time. So, how do we overcome this? Well, the answer to that question is lettuce. Sheep love lettuce. If you hold some lettuce, it will attract the sheep over to your position, which is very, very handy. But in this case, we're actually going to need to make a trail of lettuce for the sheep to follow. And thanks to Farmer Porky's conveniently placed lettuce farm right next to the bridge, that won't be a problem at all. Lay out a nice even trail using the icons at the bottom left to make sure they're all within good distance from one another. Then place our sheep nearby, quickly cross the bridge, and watch as our happy little sheep enjoys some tasty treats. Aww. Once that's done, all we gotta do is bring the sheep into the goal area, and bada bing, that's the first level complete. By the way, just in case you're wondering, nothing bad happens to the sheep. Once we finish a level, it gets brought back to the set and goes through this mystery curtain, which I'm going to imagine leads to a lifetime supply of lettuce for our woolly friends. Now of course, being the first level, that was only a taste of what's in store, but trust me, from here the game gets significantly more elaborate with its level and puzzle design, as well as upping the ante with the difficulty too. You see, what I love about this thing is that even though it is a game aimed at a young audience, throughout the entire game, the puzzles not only get more elaborate, clever, and downright genius at times, but they don't insult your intelligence either. The game occasionally gives you hints, but really, it is up to you to experiment and figure out solutions to overcome the obstacles in front of you. You're gonna mess up a lot in the process, trust me. A lot. But the game doesn't punish you for failing. If you get caught by Sam, fall into some lava, or get shot by a cannon, the game almost instantly just spawns you a short while back, ready to try again. And as with anything that makes you work hard, racking your brain for a solution, finally figuring it out and seeing a successful plan come together is just so incredibly satisfying. And maybe the most impressive thing of all is that throughout the game's 15 main levels, it almost never reuses the same puzzle twice. Each level has items, gimmicks, and obstacles that you'll only ever see in that level, There's a level that requires you to use an elastic band to drop down and steal a sheep and then later use it on 2 trees to create a catapult to fire it back to the goal. Another level sees you using a fishing rod to not only lure a sheep using lettuce, but also use it with a magnet to destroy mines and carry a small robot that you can activate to operate treadmills for you. There's a level where you gotta use an umbrella to navigate across lava vents, a level where you use a flute to hypnotize Sam into getting crushed by a boulder, and in the very next level, you try it again, but this time Sam has earplugs, so you can't use the same tactic twice and have to try something completely different. The game is always trying new things at you, and no level feels like you're doing the same thing twice. I'd love to bring you through some more of these puzzles in detail, but honestly, I don't want to spoil some of the solutions to these things, because figuring them out for yourself will lead to so many great aha moments that will not only put a smile on your face, but will constantly have you thinking, Jesus, the people who made this game are very, very clever. That being said though, I do need to highlight 2 levels in particular which are notable standouts for a few reasons, and I know anybody who's played this game will remember these 2. The first is level number 8, which we're going to call the time travel level. The gimmick in this level is that you can swap from modern times to the past using a time clock in your inventory, and the puzzles here are just so clever. Take a seed in the modern time, travel back to the past and plant it, and now when you come back, you have a big tree to climb. Got nowhere to hide in Sam's area? Well, travel back in time, move some boulders, return to present day, and now you've got some rocks to hide behind. Dragon gives you some trouble in the past, lure him back to the present, and let Sam do what he does best. This level doesn't have the toughest puzzles by any means, but every single one of this level is expertly designed around a gimmick that you only use once. It's so good. And speaking of fun gimmicks that are only used once, we also got to talk about level number 12, the ghost level. This level sees Ralph not just dealing with Sam, but a ton of ghost enemies as well. It features a segment where you gotta navigate through a maze using an Acme branded vacuum cleaner to suck them up, a section where you dress up as a ghost and have to partake in a DDR style rhythm game, a part where the ghosts steal your sheep because they think it's some sort of god, lock you up in prison, and then you've got to get out of the prison by using a small remote control robot, and after that, you need to steal back your sheep by swapping it with a blow up sheep at the precise moment that the ghosts are too busy bowing to it. It's so good. So yeah, needless to say, I think the gameplay and puzzle design in this title is pretty excellent. It's fun, it's challenging, and it's rarely frustrating. Now, I say rarely because it's certainly not perfect. It does have some PS1 quirks, I guess you could say, that will rear their head on occasion. For one, the camera is it's a little bit more bothersome than most PS1 games. Sure, you can control it using the shoulder buttons, but there are plenty of times where it will just get stuck at angles that are less than helpful, and of course, when this happens, the shoulder buttons also stop working, so the only way to fix it is to move around until it just snaps into place. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but it does happen a little bit more often than most PS1 games, and for a game that requires some very precise movements and timing, it can and will likely screw you over a few times during a playthrough. And speaking about precise movements and timing, there are parts in this game that require some incredible dexterity with your movements, and you can oftentimes feel like the game's controls and menu options weren't as fine-tuned around these parts as you'd hope, often leading to multiple attempts at some segments even when you clearly know what the solution is. Truthfully, this is something a lot of early 3D games suffer from, but when the rest of the game is so good and polished, it's little things like this that remind you are playing a PS1 game after all. Probably the part where this is most obvious is during the game's only real boss fight against Gossamer during the latter half of the game. The goal here is just to run around him in a circle for a little bit so he gets dizzy, which gives you a window to bring your sheep over to a switch, which then lets you activate some lights to scare him. But the timing and dexterity needed to make him dizzy is so incredibly tight, and not only that, the criteria for it working is really inconsistent too, so sometimes it just doesn't work as it should. It's a moment that's just counter to the puzzle gameplay that we've seen throughout the rest of the game, and it stands out for being difficult for all the wrong reasons. Thankfully, moments like these are few and far between, but when the rest of the game is so good, these parts just stick out like a sore thumb when they do rear their ugly head. Of course, that being said, in many ways, this is just janky PS1 stuff that you should come to expect a little bit from pretty much every game on this console, so even though I gotta highlight it, thankfully it doesn't come even close to ruining the whole experience. As for the game's runtime, well, it's actually a decent length all things considered. Early levels will take on average 10 to 15 minutes to figure out on your first run through, and the later levels we're probably looking at anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. And with 15 levels to get through, this means we're looking at a good 5 to 7 hours playtime for most people. And this isn't even taking into consideration the bonus time clocks that are hidden throughout each level. As a nice throwback to the animated shorts, each level has a time clock defined, which are located off the beaten path. Some of these can be very, very tricky to find and require you to approach the levels in entirely new ways, making for some great replayability if you want to complete the game 100%. And as a reward for finding these clocks, you also earn bonus points which can be exchanged for things like concept art, stills, and even some fun images of the team behind the game. Although probably the most interesting thing that you can purchase are hints to find the locations of 2 bonus levels hidden within the hub world. I won't spoil the locations of these, but they do add 2 more additional challenging levels, each with their own sheep and time clocks to collect, meaning if you want to 100% the game, you'll gotta beat these 2. Now these levels unfortunately retread a lot of the ideas that were used in previous levels, so they're probably the least unique of the bunch, but both are quite challenging, so are worth seeking out for those looking for a challenge. Plus, one of them is another time travel level, and really, the more of them the better. So I suppose all that's really left to talk about is the game's look and presentation, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. On the visual front, I don't think there's a PS1 game out there that really captures the look and feel of being in a cartoon quite like this one. You can see elements of this style of graphics in Infogram's previous Lucky Luke game, which utilizes a kind of pseudo cel shaded effect to really make the characters and its world pop. But here in 2001, this is really the best implementation of this style that I think the PS1 has to offer. The levels and backgrounds just pop with color, the textures are sharp and clean, and the characters, objects, and animations just look stellar too. And seriously, I really can't get enough of these sheep. They are just so damn cute. Some of the visual effects on the water are stunning. This waterfall, for example, mwah. I also love the design of the game show hub world and the weird 2D crowd that's staring back at you. It's kind of unsettling in a way. Of course, it probably comes as no surprise that graphics this good do occasionally come with the odd performance hiccups. Now, just as a side note, I opted to play the US release of this game, both for the aspect ratio and the bump from 25 to 30 FPS gameplay, but even then it's not uncommon to see a fair few jitters and drops to the low 20s during gameplay. It's especially noticeable in the hub world and some of the more busy levels, but truthfully, no level is really exempt from a few issues this time around. But thankfully, the game hits the 30s more often than not, and since the game has a focus on puzzles over Twitch-based gameplay, most of the time, the odd dip in frames shouldn't bother you too much at the end of the day. As for the sound, well, all of the characters in-game are voiced, well, at least the ones that usually speak are. From what I gather, the voices aren't done by the usual Looney Tunes cast members and are instead done by backup actors, and while you can tell they aren't the real deal, the performances are still really good throughout. Porky Pig still never fails to crack me up, and I don't know why, but he seemed even funnier in this game for some reason.
That wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be good. That would be bad.
Also, I gotta give props to the studio because they recorded voices for every single language on the disc. So if you ever wanted to hear what a Dutch Daffy Duck sounded like, well, wonder no more.
Is dat helemaal duidelijk?
Now the sound effects thankfully sound just like you'd expect, almost like they're ripped straight from the cartoons. Every smack, every explosion, every fall sound is on point, and of course, all very fitting for a Looney Tunes game. Now, on the other hand, something that is not very fitting for a Looney Tunes game is the game's soundtrack. Now, imagine in your head, when you see environments like this, you see these characters, you see these wacky situations, you probably have an idea in your head of what this game would sound like, right? Whimsical, lighthearted, cartoonish, yeah? Well, this is not what this game sounds like at all. Instead, this is what we actually got. Now look, I know this is kind of a meme, right? PS1 games and drum and bass music, it's a match made in heaven. But seriously, somehow, this game, the cartoony, wacky, slapstick puzzle platformer, got a drum and bass soundtrack. Now look, I'll be the first to admit, in many ways, the game's soundtrack doesn't fit this game at all, right? tonally, aesthetically, it is not a match, okay? That much is true. But regardless, this soundtrack is amazing. It's got elements of funk, jazz, chill out, drum and bass. It's really, really varied and should not fit in with this game at all. Yet, I can't imagine this game without anything but this soundtrack. Like, I don't want to say this soundtrack has a vibe, but like, you can really vibe to this thing. Check it out. All of the music here was composed by a guy named Eric Kaspar, and it's one of the most memorable aspects of the game for sure. Also, I have to take a moment to highlight one track in particular, the music for the ghost level. It is absolutely incredible. Seriously, somebody is popping off on the jazz flute here. It would make Ron Burgundy blush. Look, when all is said and done, Sheepdog and Wolf, Sheep Raider, whatever you want to call it, it is a very, very good game. It takes so many elements of all the great 2D puzzle platformers that came before it and successfully translates it into a 3D space to create a clever, challenging, engaging, funny, and above all else, fun take on the genre that really sets it apart from other platforming and puzzle games on the console. And I think most impressively of all, as a video game representation of classic Looney Tunes cartoons, I don't think any game has ever done it better than this one. You're literally acting out the crazy schemes and shenanigans that you would see in these animated shorts. You're the one ordering the Acme gadgets, you're the one dropping boulders on people's heads, putting sheep in catapults, and it all makes sense in the context of the game you're playing. You're quite literally playing a cartoon, and of course nowadays with games like Cuphead on the visual front, we've at least pretty much nailed that down, but the fact that this game looks beyond the visuals and aesthetics at what makes these cartoons so funny, so clever, so iconic, and kept that at the heart of the gameplay, well, I think that's what makes this game so special, timeless, dare I say. Well, assuming you're used to a little PS1 jank, but I assume everybody is, right? Come on, it's not that bad. You know, I often wonder why this game isn't more widely recognized. Now, I'm trying to tone down my use of the word underrated because the more that I think about it, underrated really just means that you think people should like something more because you do. And truthfully, everybody I know who's played this game speaks very, very highly of it anyway, so that absolutely isn't the case. Personally, I think it's a combination of things. The game having different names across various regions, the game's usage of lesser known Looney Tunes characters as its stars, the fact it's a pretty late release on the console, the fact it's a puzzle platformer, also the game's whole gimmick is stealing sheep, which probably doesn't sound all that appealing to most people. All that stuff probably had something to do with it. But really, the purpose of this video is to help spread the word. This is a very, very good game, and if you take the time to try it, I feel pretty confident that you'll feel the same. And really, the more people trying and talking about good games, the better, because at the end of the day, I just want you all to have a fun time in your spare time, and also maybe listen to some drum and bass and jazz flute, but really, who can blame me there? Anyway, that's enough long-winded Looney Tunes PS1 talk for one day, but that being said, I really do appreciate you watching and hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be back with some more stuff in a little bit, but until then, take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you all again real soon.
Better luck next time, Ralph. Oh, sure, you can't win them all, you know. Thanks. Nice day, huh, Sam? Yep, good to be alive, Ralph.